Today marks 1 year since Bob Iger stunned Wall Street and returned to the top job at Disney. He's been working on a turnaround plan as he faces headwinds for the business, plus an activist fight. Joining us now is Jason Bazinet, Managing Director at Citigroup. So, Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Let's just start there. It's been 1 year. Jason, how do you grade Mr. Iger's performance so far? What do you think he's gotten right? What could he do better?
Well, if I had to give him a grade, I'd probably say a B. I think what's gone right is we've seen a very large restructuring, so $7.5 billion in total. We've seen streaming losses narrow by $1 billion. He's restored P&L responsibility to the studio heads, and those are all good things. I only give him a B because the streaming business is still generating losses. And we still have a lot of plates that are spinning. They're exploring strategic alternatives for ABC and the India assets. We still don't have resolution on whether the price they're going to pay when they acquire the 1/3 of Hulu. So there's still some TBDs out there.
Jason, it's Julie here. What is the probability that all of those TBDs end up as best case scenarios?
Well, look, I guess for the ABC sale and the India sale, the street doesn't have very lofty expectations. So assuming that the potential buyers are going to pay a reasonable price, I think that would be sort of, I would just call it noise that comes out of the ecosystem and gets the street focused on the good news, which is really around parks and streaming. Getting the streaming losses to break even, I would say the odds are actually quite good. It's sort of the mirror image of upsizing the restructuring, the $7.5 billion restructuring. And so I think that's very much on track. I think there is an outstanding question where the street's really giving no credit, and this really underpins the bull case, which is once the streaming business gets to break even, can they actually generate, Netflix type margins in the streaming business? That's still a long way off. And I think you have to give lower marks for that just because there's a lot of wood to chop between where we are now and where we're going. So it's shifting from a cost-cutting story to get to break even to really sort of getting the right pricing for the streaming service to generate good margins.
And Jason, there's a lot of big personalities in this name. I don't just mean Bob Iger. Activist Nelson Peltz is involved too. He's back. He's seeking multiple board seats. Is that a negative for Disney shareholders, Jason? Is it a positive? How do you think through that dynamic?
Well, it's really interesting. Even when Peltz made his first run at Disney, one of the weird, I guess I would just call it dissonance, is we were not picking up massive dissatisfaction on the part of institutional investors with Disney. Normally when I see an activist come in, it's sort of the sort of last, it's like the missing piece of the puzzle that puts a capstone on just, a significant amount of shareholder frustration. It takes an activist to go in there and sort of stir things up. That was not the situation with Disney the last time Peltz was around. It's not the situation now. So I don't really view it as a positive or a negative. I think the honest answer is that there's a lot of dislocation going on in traditional media. It's going to take time to reorient any of these companies in a way to make money in a streaming world. And I think the buy side isn't frustrated with Mr. Iger or Disney's management team because they know it's going to take a while. And where we sit today, we don't have demonstrable evidence that the streaming business is going to be profitable. But Mr. Iger is doing all the right things, right? Getting rid of the non-core assets, at least getting the streaming business to break even. And so I just think he needs a little bit of breathing room, and the buy side understands that.
Even if he is going to get breathing room, we always ask everybody about the succession question, Jason, because listen, this is you could argue, he screwed this up last time, and that's why he had to come back. So how much time does he have to figure that out?
Well, 2 years is what I would say. He's got 2 years left on his contract.
Right.
I would say, the irony here is Disney's always had a little bit of difficulty with succession, right? And there was a carefully laid out plan that had to do with Jay Rizzullo that was running parks and Staggs that was the CFO, and they sort of swapped roles. And the whole idea was to make this a very smooth transition. And you're right, it all ended up going badly. And what that meant is Mr. Chapek came in as CEO. And, I would just say for Mr. Chapek, I would say that was another example where there was not institutional clamoring for Mr. Chapek to move on. I mean, the losses were there, but it was still sort of, it was more a function of the streaming losses than it was anything that Mr. Chapek did wrong. My 2 cents. And I just didn't hear a lot of upset investors, even when Mr. Chapek was CEO. But what Mr. Iger and the board are going to do in terms of succession, it's still a TBD. There is no clear plan as we sit here today.
Do you think, Jason, the new CFO there, Hugh Johnston, possible CEO at some point? Could he be groomed for that role?
Possible. I think he's a little bit old. I mean, Disney used to have this role where once you hit 65, you had to retire. It was sort of mandatory retirement, and Mr. Iger sort of changed those rules. So I guess everything is a little bit in flux, but it would certainly be a pretty old gentleman to take Mr. Iger's seat. So it wouldn't be my most likely choice.
Jason, always love having you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was Citi's Jason Bazinet.
You bet.